Hey guys, it's Anthony Carey with Function First, the pain-free movement specialist, and Cortex. Today we're going to share with you one of our core assessments that we do as part of the pain-free movement specialist, the single leg stance. Now you guys are familiar with the single leg stance, but we're going to go over probably one of the most subtle but most consequential findings that you might end up seeing with one of your clients in this assessment. Now remember, we do the single leg stance versus the stork stance because the single leg stance represents a moment in time, like a snapshot of what somebody is doing when they walk. Couch potato takes 2,000 to 3,000 steps a day. That means each limb is 1 to 1,500 steps per day just on that individual. So there's a lot of cumulative stress that goes along with what we may see in what appears to be a static assessment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little clip from Know Thy Pelvis. Some of you will remember young AC in that video. And from there, I'm going to follow it up with a couple case studies of real clients that I've used where we'll be looking just at their lumbar spine. You're going to follow it all the way to the end. Let us know what you think, and thanks for watching.
Is where we're going to really look at some of the things that happen to be the hardest to see, but potentially the most critical to our assessment of what's going on with the pelvis and the lumbar spine. So as we're looking at the individual from the back, we're going to recheck many of the things that we saw from the front. Did we see an overpronation valgus knee? Did we see the pelvis list to one side? But when we're looking at rotation, we really can find a lot of things from the back view. What should happen, ideally, in a stable and functional individual is they stand on one leg. The pelvis does not rotate. If the person gets on one leg and the pelvis rotates, along with the lumbar spine and the trunk, that rotation will be coming from the hip. So if, Michael, you were to stand on your right leg for me, and we saw this kind of rotation in Michael, okay, that's actually external rotation of his right hip. But we have the pelvis, the sacrum, the lumbar spine and the trunk all going in the same direction. So we know that's coming from the hip. You can put your foot down. But what we often see in folks is the rotation may occur not at the pelvis, but only at the lumbar spine. So a little trick that I use is I take a pen and I'll have the person stand on one leg. And you're not going to stand on one leg, Michael, because you're not going to be able to reproduce this. If you do, we're going to have to be doing some exercises with you after this video. Is I would put the pen right on their lumbar spine. And if Michael were on his one leg and his pelvis was staying where we wanted it to, but the lumbar spine was rotating, we'd see the pen turn. And so we have segmental rotation here independent of the pelvis. That's not a good thing for the lumbar spine. We may also see the pelvis rotate without the lumbar spine. Again, not ideal because relatively that's rotation in the opposite direction. If there was going to be a rotation, we'd want it all to go together. So we'd either have the pelvis and the lumbar spine, along with the sacrum obviously moving together, or nobody moving at all. So that's one of the things that we look at to see. And if we're still unsure, we know where the PSIS landmarks are now. We can even sit it right on the sacrum, and then you know the pelvis isn't moving. Then you go up to lumbar spine, and the lumbar spine is moving. Equally important is the relative rotation, meaning that if the pelvis is rotating, but the lumbar spine is rotating more, or the lumbar spine is rotating less, either way we have a shear that's occurring in that general area of the body, and that's a lack of stability through that part of the body.
Okay, now we're back to the future, and you can see with this client, I have the high-tech pen over the sacrum. Then we move up to the lumbar spine, and you'll notice that significant turning of the pen, or the rotation. So the sacrum is square to the camera. When we go up, you can see that there is a difference in the rotation between the two. Here on a still photo of another client, you can see that the sacrum is rotated to the right. And then if we go up to the lumbar spine, you'll see the same degree of rotation. So this, of course, indicates that it's most likely coming from rotation in the hip as the pelvis and lumbar spine move together as a unit. We know that we want very little rotation in the lumbar spine, especially independent of what the sacrum's doing. On the other side, you'll see the sacrum is pretty square, and there's a tiny little bit of lumbar rotation to the left here, as opposed to what the pelvis is doing on its own. So if we look at them side by side, we can see that there is on the left stance, single leg stance, there's a significant amount of pelvic rotation and concurrent lumbar rotation. On the right stance, we see the pelvis is not rotating, but we see a little bit of lumbar rotation. This is a half time of an actual client on the video here. He is going to be standing on his right single limb. We look down, which is a great perspective as if we're right behind him, and we can see that the pelvis and the lumbar spine are doing what they're supposed to do. They're maintaining stable, no transverse plane motion. When he switches to the left leg, and again, we get a little bit closer and look down, you will see that the pelvis is rotating to the right and the lumbar spine is rotating to the right as well. So again, something more likely coming from external rotation of the left hip. So as we look at what's going on at the relationship and the coupling of pelvic motion with lumbar spine motion, and if there's any intersegmental motion of the lumbar spine independent of what the sacrum and pelvis is doing, that's going to be kind of a red flag for us and something that we're going to need to address with our exercise strategy. Hope this was helpful for you guys. Please leave any comments or questions below, and we will look forward to providing more insight into the PFMS and how we are helping people with chronic pain through movement, exercise, and coaching in the future.